Hi guys, welcome back to MPods. We're here with Dr. Mark Kiel today from Genomenon, and we're super excited about this interview. So let's just jump right in. Hi, Mark. Do you think you could, give a brief introduction of who you are and what you do at Genomenon?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Eric. Hi, see you. Hi, audience. It's a pleasure to be here to share my experiences. There's a lot I could say. I'll try to be succinct here. I'm an MD, PhD by training. Got my training at the University of Michigan, focused on molecular genetic pathology. Went all the way through a fellowship even before I realized that there was big things happening in genomics and that I could be a big part of that and that there were ways of making that happen from outside of the academic infrastructure. So I got a great deal of support from the U of M ecosystem, started the company Genomenon with my co-founders and professors, Kojo Allen Toba Johnson and Megan Lim. That was about 10 years ago now. And I'll tell much more about Genomenon here shortly, but 10 years ago, it was just me and my two professor colleagues. I was the CEO for a time. Now I'm the chief science officer and glad in it. I supervise the product strategy, the company vision, and the direction that we're going in. The services work that we do, which is a component of our offerings. Getting back to my scientific roots and liaising with clients and making sense of our data. Work on our customer success and our support team, as well as doing the proper science that we do. Is we're leveraging a lot of advanced computational techniques on complicated, sophisticated science, and there's a lot to talk about and publish on, and I supervise that as well.
Thank you. Yeah, so we can definitely get into the story of Genomenon, but first I'd love to, go back to, your university days. You did your MD, PhD at the University of Michigan, and I'm just curious, so what were you like during the university days? Specifically, you could mention your undergrad as well at Northwestern, but specifically with the University of Michigan and your experiences here, and sort of could you walk us through what you were like, some of the key critical experiences
Mm-hmm.
and the resources that you had access to at the university in shaping your journey?
Sure. I'll start. So I did my undergrad at Northwestern, and I started out as pre-med, and I loved the coursework. And I love the idea of helping people. I mean, that's sort of cliche when you submit your pre-med applications, you want to help people. I was properly motivated as most of the applicants are, but that was kind of a vague notion as I want to help people. As much as I definitely enjoyed in my medical training interacting with patients, I I wanted to help on a larger scale. There's a great deal of great benefit that individual physicians provide. I wanted to do that more behind the scenes where it would create a potential for bigger impact on multiple patients by creating big initiative changes. And if I'm honest, I also had a hard time with the emotional component of patient interaction. I mean, clearly I liked people. That was not a problem at all. There was lots of positivity there. It was the impact of delivering cancer diagnoses and having babies be stillborn and having people get devastating news. That was a real challenge for me. I took it back home with me, and God bless the people who can do that. I couldn't do that. So those two things combined with changing my thinking, and I went, well, as I said, behind the scenes. That really focused my attention on pathology, which is I've heard pathologists referred to as a doctor's doctor. This is further along in my training outside of undergrad at Northwestern, but where I realized that pathology was a place to have impact on patient care, influence diagnoses and treatment decisions, um, definitely have an influence on patients and do so from a broader platform. While I was understanding how I wanted to be a practicing clinician from behind the scenes as a pathologist, I was very focused on the science that I did. So an MD PhD program is a combined program. I always viewed myself as more of a scientist than a physician. there's a split that you have. You can't do both 100%. And my focus was more like 80% on the science and 20% on the clinical practice. But in med school, I was taking notes in the margins about the experiments I was going to run the next day. So I had a clear focus on the science that I wanted to do, but I was always attuned to where were there problems and challenges that I could solve in my medical school coursework as well as in my patient interactions. And genomics, it practically bit me on the nose, as this is a big sweeping change to the field. And what is needed to fully harness the power and potential of this new technical capability of genome sequencing is understanding the data. So I guess in summary, I was kind of a nerd. I love data. I love big Excel files and making sense of all that data, but all with a view toward doing good for people and doing good in the world at a larger scale. So those were some of my motivations and a bit of a window into what I was like back then.
I see. So you worked on the Human Genome Project for a little bit back there. So how did your focus as a scientist evolve over time, and what were some of the key switches or pivots in your focus as a scientist?
So just to be real clear, I did not personally work on the Human Genome Project. I
Gotcha.
actually came up as a graduate student when it was published, and that was where I had this epiphany that this is just the start. It's a huge monumental achievement for science and our species to understand ourselves so thoroughly, but it's just the start. And that actually was where I got my attention turned toward making sense of the data. And so that began my calibration of where to turn my attention. You asked what I was like. As much of a nerd as I was, I didn't know much about programming. I didn't know much about computers. And when I was a graduate student, I entered in with a biology bent. That's what I cared about. That's what I wanted. There's a joke about biologists not wanting to do math and not liking computers. Well, that's what bioinformatics is. And I realized you had to have both. So I wrote my first Hello World program in Perl. There was a kind professor, a very respected colleague of mine, who very patiently taught me how to code early days. And boy, was I hooked. I loved that. When I had Hello World, I thought nothing can stop me. I can do anything I want now. And so, in fact, the first thing that I did, the first major thing that I did, was undertaking the systematic in silico mutation of every position in the human genome and how an author can describe it. And I put that in a flat file because that's all I knew how to do. And it was many, many gigabytes. And I said, boy, this is powerful. This is like a mutation dictionary to help, you know, decode the human genome like a Rosetta Stone. And I figured out a way to take that data and index the published literature. It was obviously very clunky and crude. This was 10, 12 years ago now, but it worked. And that was the most important thing. And I started to see meaningful results come out of it. And there was really no looking back from there. So I would say, as I mentioned, that's how I calibrated my attention, my scientific pursuits. The lab that I joined, those professors that I alluded to earlier, they had the samples, the biology, the expertise. They needed somebody to help them unlock that data. So it was a beautiful, perfect complementarity. They gave me so much free rein on the lab, samples that they had. So I was just making discovery after discovery, and really wanted, once I was done with that, turn my attention to making sure that it came to bear in treating patients. Just, making diagnoses, prescribing drugs, making it easy for clinicians to see that data, to surface the information that I mentioned in the published literature. So in a nutshell, that's where Genomenon got its start, is beginning, in my scientific pursuits.
So could you speak more to the problems that you were encountering as a scientist, and how, and like the really difficult, problems that you had to face?
Yep. So if there are any graduate students listening, this will not be news to you, but there's a lot of manual effort that undertakes a graduate project and pursuit. The first the first experiments that I did were very tedious in my PhD training, spending hours upon hours doing very rote work, necessary, important, critical to be done by a person with expertise, but it took a long time. It was very monotonous. When I switched my attention over to genomics, I realized this is just data. It's not ones and zeros, it's A's, T's, G's, and C's. There's a way, if I can do it, there's a way to automate it, to take the heuristics and the approach that I take to analyzing this data. There's a way to make that happen with this data, no matter how complicated. So in a way, it kind of foreshadowed the primacy of AI and large language models, which are just the calculators for words and knowledge. I said to myself, we can understand the DNA. We ask the same kind of questions of each variant. It's just particular to that variant, but we can go out to those different resources and have the information come to us, rather than me spending my time asking the same questions over and over again and getting that data and bringing it back. The computer should do that. So that, in essence, is where the idea behind Genomenon's founding came. And in fact, it means born out of need in Greek, had to be born. We got to do this. This is to break the information or bioinformatic bottleneck. We need to be able to do this at scale. And so systematically creating those mutations, understanding how authors would describe them, getting access to all of that content, indexing it, and then organizing it and annotating it and presenting it, that's what we've solved here with Genomenon, at least for the first version of Genomenon, the first iteration, and everything else, all the other value and offerings that we provide in Genomenon spring from that core data set that we produced so many years ago in its crude initial form.
How did you know it was the right time to leave academia
Oh
and
boy.
launch your business?
You never know. We're talking about my children. I have 3 children. You never know when it's the right time. Like there is never a convenient time to do these sorts of things. I think it was then or never. At the time, it was now or never. I spoke to my mentors and co-founders, and I said, you know what? If I don't do this now, if I don't try to take action now, I'm gonna live with regret. I'm gonna live with what if. Could I have done it? I should have done it, and I didn't want to have that lingering doubt. And so I just jumped right in. I had no software experience and I was trying to build a software company. I had no startup experience and I was trying to, bootstrap and raise prize money, grant money, and friends, family, and full rounds of funding, and even an initial angel and VC round. I had never done those things before. I was an inveterate academic. You could argue that I was an old entrepreneur, though that might be a myth, but I had never done those things before. So it was a very bold, this is no brag, you could say stupid, just jump right in. But that's the way that you have to do these sorts of things. And for any aspiring entrepreneurs, is it increments. You don't have to go out. In fact, very often, almost all the time, what you plan is not what happens. The best kind of entrepreneurs are the ones who adapt, who take critical feedback, and the critical feedback can come from the market, from the customers, from advisors, from people who've tried before. If you're hard-headed and not open to outside influence or data, it's going to be much harder for you. There's a difference between being hard-headed and persevering. There's a lot of persevering that you have to do, but you'll find that there's less that you have to do if you're open to the feedback that the market is giving you or your advisors are giving you. In fact, that's one of the things that investors look for most of all is, are you coachable as an entrepreneur? And so, I mean, I had the benefit of a great many very expert mentors, and they taught me how to listen to them and how to refine my ideas. So in a way, that was my academic training. When you ask though, what made me want to jump out of it is I wanted to see if I could do it. And that was the right time. The stars were aligned. There was a need. I felt pretty confident I could do it. So I just jumped right in.
Thank you. Thank you. And then another thing that I was curious about in doing research was the role of humility in starting a company. How do you view, could you speak more to the role of humility in how you run your company and how the role that's played over the founding of Genomenon and its story?
Yeah. Um, I, I didn't see the fight, but Mike Tyson has been in the news, and he has got a famous quote where he says, "Everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face." I'm not a boxer. I'm not much of an athlete at all, but I mean, there's an analogy here when you're an entrepreneur. All of these plans, you know, the business plan, your product, that the technology that you spent years developing, the product designs that you linger on, how beautiful they are. If it doesn't matter to the market, they're not going to pay for it. If that doesn't solve a need that the client has, you have to go back and redress. You can't say, but I spent so much time on it. So you have to be open and honest and coachable, like I said, but you can't hold fast to your own vision of what the product should be if it's just not valuable, if it doesn't work, if it's not something somebody is willing to pay for. So if you're not humble by design, if you're going to keep doing this, you have to be humble if you're going to survive, because there really isn't much room for arrogance here. There are a minority few entrepreneurs who hit a stride with the first, you know, idea that they have, and it just goes gangbusters from there. You don't often hear about the failures that they had or the other entrepreneurs who struggle and eventually hit and break through. It's about shortening the time it takes you to learn those things and build out a process to get better at getting better. And arrogance gets in the way of that, I would say. So the other thing though is that's humility in front of customers and receiving feedback and, you know, listening to investors and the like. This at the end, when you start a business, as with any discipline, really, you're working with other people. And I mentioned before some of the deficits that I had when I started the company. If I said I can do all of this and I want to do all of it and I'm going to hoard my equity and I don't want to share with anybody, we wouldn't be talking. There would be no Genomenon. So knowing what you can't do and finding people who can and letting them do those things, that is a key part of building a team, building a company, and trusting that they can do those things. Those are all aspects that I would say where you benefit from being a little bit more humble than arrogant.
Hmm. So that's the problem solving, sort of the humility aspect of it. Well, could you tell us the story of some really difficult problems that you encountered on the pathway to today in Genomenon?
Running out of money. So when you're a first-time entrepreneur, as similarly, when we wrote some of our first grants, I naively thought if I ask for less money, they're going to be more willing to give it to me. Like I don't need what I want to win some money. I don't want to be seen to be greedy. So I'm going to lower my ask because I think that's going to increase my chances of receiving the proceeds. And that's in fact not how grants and investment operate. They want to see that you can do something, that you're going to do something big, and you're going to ask for the money that you need to do that. So when you ask what are some of the problems that we had to solve is calibrating that right. I raised too little, I promised too much, and I didn't deliver. I couldn't deliver because I didn't have the experience. Um, I made a valiant effort of it, and I had great early investors and board members, but this is back to humility and arrogance. I could have easily said, no, it's either going to be me or nobody. And very quickly after I realized that this was too big an opportunity for me to do on my own, having had no previous experience and no ability to learn from my own mistakes, I didn't want to do that to Genomenon because I thought the value was the potential for value was too great. So I basically fired myself and said, I'm not going to be CEO anymore. I need to have, a follow-on CEO, somebody who has learned, somebody who, has made these mistakes before and won't make them again, somebody who's seen the other side where I want to get to. That way they can help in, guide where we're going, and I can learn from that person. And so I was fortunate enough to find somebody who fit that bill. I've mentioned some of the other people is Mike Klein. Someone else who I had to mention when I said I didn't have startup experience is my co-founder, Steve Schwartz. He had both of those. He built startups. He was an expert coder and knew about building software. So it was a perfect complementarity. I knew the space. I could talk to the end users. He could build what I had in my mind. Mike could run the company. And then it starts nucleating from there. You need a salesperson at a certain point. You need somebody who can be a marketer and the face of the company and make a nice presentable product, face of the company. So you build out all of those things. And that gets back to what I said before about you can do it. You can increment from there. It doesn't have to come out fully born and fully realized. You can go from, point A to point B. So running out of money was a huge problem. Navigating my own inexperience was another thing that I addressed. Analogous to running out of money is initially people said uniformly, wow, this is really cool. And I said, where's the check? It was just cool. We had to, as I said, go back and refine and reiterate and understand what needs they had and not linger on all of the things we could build and all the cool technology that we had. If it's not solving a problem, they're not going to pay. And so that's been a very long journey in the product hat that I wear of understanding that you really have to understand what the customer needs and build with that in mind, as opposed to daydreaming about what could be cool to build or what they might need. If you narrow that gap of understanding what the customer needs and wants and will pay for, the quicker you can narrow that gap, the better. That was a problem that took a long time to solve.
So about Mastermind, the specific product and its success, was there a moment that you knew that this was real and this was successful and that this was going to be something huge?
So there was not a moment. It was like a slow unfolding dawn. It was, the sun rises at a certain point, but before then it starts to glow a little bit. And then does it really rise when you just see the sun peeking over the treetops, or does it rise when it's, high noon? The first industry show that I went to, I was still CEO at the time. I'd never been to a show like that at the exhibit hall, and here I was with a booth and trying to hawk my wares. So, we had a demo, we had a computer. The co-founders that I mentioned brought some high people of high importance in the field around to the booth, and I showed them my demo, and they said, this is really great, but they didn't pay. And there was some discouragement there, but the gratification came about 4 years later when we closed a deal with that company. I can't say it because of our agreements, but you would know the name. I think anybody in biomedicine would know the name, and we closed that deal. So that was our first conversation with any live customer. And the fact that they didn't want to buy right there sight unseen was a gut punch for me, because I thought that would be the measure of success. It took a long time for them to buy, but they did buy. And that was where I felt like, I remember that. I remember what it was like back then and being so discouraged. I mean, that's happened multiple times now where we had these early conversations and it was nice, but now we've closed those deals and we're expanding. And it's also very gratifying to have people that I've never met want to buy what I've built. That may sound, de minimis as an entrepreneur, but I remember what it was like the early days. So that's what I'm reflecting on, is what I would have thought back then if I knew then what I know now about where we are. It would have been impressive and very encouraging, despite the years of some discouraging findings and incremental progress. But here we are, because it builds on itself.
Yeah. Yeah, they were very excited, but that excitement doesn't easily convert into a check.
Yeah,
So
I think they thought it was cool, and I think they were not trying to flatter my ego. They were being polite about how excited they were, how interested. I think that there was something there. There was a need that I was solving, but they didn't quite get how I would solve it, and they were pretty sure that it wouldn't be usable for them at the time. So I think they wanted to be polite, but also be apprised. They wanted to stay in touch with me and the company and our progress. And that is where it comes down to that perseverance that I talked about, is there's humility and just enough confidence to know that you should stick with it. In fact, that's one of Genomenon's core values, is humble confidence, is your worth and you can deliver against that worth, but you're not arrogant about it, and you're open to feedback, and you're receptive to outside opinions.
hmm. Yeah, and separating the signal from the noise in that situation seems very difficult, in that if it had been all signal, like all based on the check size that they were willing to pay at that moment, it probably wouldn't have allowed you to persevere past it. So if there
It's
wasn't
a
that noise.
it's a great point. So this didn't happen to us as a company, though you could argue that some of the things we tried were false leads. And mentioned what I'm doing on the product side is planning, understanding the market potential. Is some companies fall foul of their first customer, building out a product for a market size of one, and just slavishly building out what that customer needs, and not realizing that they're diverting your attention from a larger market potential, and that nobody else wants what they're building, or you built it so stringent to their criteria that you can't go out and sell it to somebody else. That's, as I said, we didn't necessarily make any of those mistakes, though I've seen it before. That's a risk that you run when you get dazzled by somebody who's interested, especially if they're cutting a check. It's a tension that you have to fight. I've heard it said that some of the most important deals as a salesperson are the deals you walk away from. You could do it, or as a company, you could do it, but should you do it? And that takes a lot of discipline, especially early days, especially when you're trying to show traction and pay the bills. It can be a challenge to strike that balance.
Shirley, did you have a question
Oh,
for us?
I was thinking like, so when you talk about, you see some of the other like examples. So kind of like, how do you guys deal with like competitors in the field? Because genomic and uh, cancer diagnostic software. So I guess like through the process that Genomenon started from 2014 till date, there are definitely competitors along the way, and I'm trying to see like, how do you handle these things that you're doing in the
So
sales or like scientific
all
course?
you have to do is be better than them.
Mm,
But to give you a more nuanced approach, is initially
mhm,
there, I don't want to name names, it's not relevant, but initially there was a main competitor
Mm.
And when we looked at it, we realized we could go head to head with this competitor, or we could say, we're not even competitive. You can use both. And that has to do with positioning, the story that you tell to the customers, the way that your product provides value and how to use it. If there's an incumbent product in the market, expecting to jump in there and rip that out of the workflows and all the experience that they have with, the customers have with that competitive product, that's a tall order. There's a high bar to prove that you're more valuable than that. A slower way to increment into market share is to say, we're compatible. You use this for that, but you also probably do this, and that's where we're ideally suited. And so there's a divergence for your product so that you're not literally trying to redo something that somebody already did, because then you have to either compete on price, ease of use, or have the data and the value be much higher, or of higher quality. It's easier to have something unique in the market, and so that's where you differentiate. So that was an experience that we had. The other thing to say, though, is Mike, our CEO, and I, when we were very early days together, we would go out with this idea that you're not a competitor, you're a potential partner. And we actually would say to ourselves, these other companies are only a competitor if they want to be. If they think that we're competitive and don't want to talk to us, then they're competitors. And so we had a broad partnership approach. We have the potential to go head to head with a dozen or more groups who provided software to interpret the assay results, is a good way to say it. We could have built a 14th or 15th software that would compete with those, or we could focus our attention on the data that they all need to fuel what they do, and then partner with each of them. And that we had this option. There was a fork in the road, and we actually talked quite a bit about, oh, you should do that. Everybody's doing that. There's a huge market over there. And we're like, nobody's making money over there in that space, and it's already crowded. So why would we do that? They're having challenges and struggling to get a foothold. They're all going to want to differentiate, and we can provide the differentiator. So we went down that road. I called it the Intel Inside model, if you remember that slogan. Nobody cares about a processor until Intel advertises it. So we made that mastermind inside approach and partnered very broadly with those other would-be competitors, and instead we're a supplier to them. So that's a way to position yourself in the market with your product and as a company to gain a foothold and get known. And now, I mean, each of those potential or would-be competitors, they have their own customers. And we've got an advertisement mechanism to showcase to them what we can provide, and they're coming to us now. And we're not stealing anything from those partners. It's in biology what you call a commensalism. We're mutually benefiting each other. So that's a much more harmonious way to work in this space than try to outcompete, 14, 13, whatever competitors.
Yeah, I think that definitely resonates. Because, well, in one of my previous roles, I remember our co-founder, they were actually looking at a company's failed clinical trials. Well, they kind of are, okay, this is the route that we shouldn't go, right? They failed at that, then we can try something else. Yeah.
And yeah, I want to be respectful of your time, and that was a good that was such a unique insight in that they're not competitors if they don't view it as competition. So you could view it as partnership. So I really like that. But I also want to ask a fun question, because I just have to ask out of just pure curiosity. So when you're working so much on on genetic sequencing and the human genome, has it changed your perspective on the age-old question of nature versus nurture at all?
Has it changed? Well, this is a bit of a fun answer. I'm an identical twin. So my twin brother is my genetic equivalent. And there's a lot of there's very, very many similarities. There's no ESP or telepathy or anything, but we respond identically in the same circumstances. And so the depth of understanding and appreciation that I have for the complexity of the human genome has just made that more awesome, I think, to say that this is the code, this is the guidebook to life and who you're going to become. I see it play out deterministically. I can tell your eyes are going to be blue, you're going to have, you know, freckles or, you know, what, and more complicated personality traits. But then there's an impact of the environment that you can't see coming out of the genome. But I do get that there's a mechanism to give you increased risk of disease. There's some stochasticism where you just get unlucky and have a mutation, but that is going to surely cause this disease if you see that genotype. So you see that balance between the determinism and the environmental influence play out in sort of like choreography. I would say, if I'm allowed to be that poetic, that's what I gain when I look at the uncoding, decoding of the DNA sequence and helping interpret it, is I reflect on more human traits like creativity and personality and emotion. Those are all in our DNA makeup too, heavily influenced by our environment. We're focused on disease right now, but it does give me a deeper, more profound appreciation for who we are as a species and how we interact with each other.
Great.
Hopefully that was a fun enough answer.
No, that was. And yeah, I think that's a perfect place to end it. And yeah, I want to thank you so much, Mark, for coming on the podcast. It's been great. And I
Yep.
know I've learned quite a bit, and I can't wait to share with our listeners.
Awesome. Well, thank you for inviting me. I love doing this sort of thing. Sharing with fellow young entrepreneurs. If anybody is interested in reaching out and having a private chat, if you want to make my contact information available, I'd be happy to have separate conversations.
Yeah, sure. All right. Thank you so much. Have a good week.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
You likewise. See you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.